who experienced an earthquake while they were in their mother's womb. And they found out that as compared to those who did not experience an earthquake situation, babies whose mother experienced earthquakes while they were pregnant were actually underweight as compared to, to babies who did not. Now, you could never do this as an RCT, but here's a natural situation where the mother was under deep stress because of either an earthquake. I believe they've also done this with famine studies, where women who have been subjected to a famine, the babies are undernourished as well. That's not a surprise because even the mother's not eating enough. But the earthquake thing is the mother was stressed out and that transmitted to the child. And so the child was born underweight. So that's one example of a natural experiment. That's one of the reasons why it's called natural experiment, because it's not I as the researcher who am conducting the experiment. The experiment is happening on its own. I'm just looking for data associated with that event so that I can measure what is the effect of that event. Right? So now with natural events, that's fine. I explained some examples. Legislation can also result in treatment being given to some groups and not being given to other groups. So for instance, increase in the wage laws in New Jersey affected residents in New Jersey but didn't affect anybody else. Or implementation of NREGA in phase 1. Some group of districts got it, others did not, right? So these would all, in fact, many NREGA studies are actually natural experiments simply because of the way the government chose to implement it, right? What's important here is to make sure that program selection should not be correlated to the outcome that you're trying to measure or to the beneficiaries' observed and unobserved characteristics. What does that mean? That means the people participating, either the treatment group or the control group, should have had no influence on the natural event that took place. So nobody has any control on when earthquakes happen, unfortunately, or they don't have control on famines. So there's no chance they influence that. But in the instance of NREGA, for instance, suppose I as a rural household heard that the neighboring district is going to get NREGA as in phase 1, but my district is not going to get NREGA in phase 1. So what do? I move. I move my household and I shift to the treatment area. That biases my sample, because you should be, with natural experiments, you should be able to prove that your control group and treatment group are not contaminated, that they are not shifting situations because it serves their purpose, right? And that the outcome that you're trying to measure was not influenced by the beneficiary or the participant. So he didn't change, he didn't move across the border just to benefit from a particular intervention. So these studies are similar to RCTs, except that they are out of the control of the researcher. The researcher is not assigning to treatment and control. It's some natural event beyond the control of the researcher. So it could be the government influencing, implementing a law. It could be an NGO implementing a program in 3 slums. It could also be just a natural event like an earthquake or famine. Or I've also seen creation of subways, like the metro lines in Colombia or Bolivia or something. There was a study done on when the government implemented a subway system connecting poor area to the more urban center. What was the effect of that subway system? So clearly there were economic advantages, but what they also found, why it was a natural experiment, is because the research team had nothing to do with construction of the metro. They were simply evaluating, there were data existing already, and they found crime rates in the economically depressed area actually decreased because the metro station came up, there was better lighting, there were more security available, they're monitoring the place. As a result, overall, even though the government's plan was just to facilitate connectivity, this was an unintended outcome that crime rates went down, right? So natural experiments have been used in many different situations. So one example of this is the 1993 constitutional, this is an Indian example. There was a constitutional amendment mandating that 1/3 of Gram Panchayat Pradhan seats were to be reserved for women, and that Gram Panchayats were now to have greater power over the expenditure on their projects, right? So this was a law that was implemented. Research teams had nothing to do with it. They didn't influence the law, but this one particular research team decided to figure out whether what was the effect of this on investments made by Gram Panchayats. So for the panchayats that are randomly assigned to have women, so the government decided that there would be random assignment of which village panchayats are women, and it would be like every panchayat would have a turn eventually. They decided to study what happens to expenditure in the villages which have a female panch. And so they studied just two districts, one in West Bengal and one in Rajasthan, where they compared investments, Gram Panchayat investments, in reserved versus unreserved Gram Panchayats, right? So they were trying to figure out, does having a female Panchayat head change the kind of investments that, the projects in which the Gram Panchayat makes investments? And so this, again, this was a natural experiment because they had no control, the research team had no control on this law. And the law was, of course, passed many years ago, whereas the study is fairly recent. What they found out in terms of results is villages that have a female sarpanch also have more females coming in to register complaints with the Gram Panchayat. So there's an increase in the number of complaints made by women. So panchayats have a record of who came in to complain and what was the complaint, at least in the districts where these guys did their study. And so they managed to check that having a female head increases the likelihood of women coming in and complaining. And what they found is that women tend to, in West Bengal, women tend to complain more about water and roads. And in Rajasthan, women are actually involved in construction of roads in a bigger way in this particular district. And so they tend to complain more about the availability or non-availability of water. So in the districts where there are female heads, women tend to complain more. I mean, they feel freer in approaching the Gram Panchayat to register a complaint. And then they also tracked what were the complaints about, and they found that in those villages, women tend to complain more about water and roads in West Bengal and then in Rajasthan. But what's even more interesting is, in response to those complaints, the female panch tends to spend more of the project money on addressing those complaints. So in West Bengal, panchayats with a female head spent more, Gram Panchayats with a female head spent more on water and roads in response to the complaints raised by women, and in Rajasthan more money was spent on water. So women panchayats are more responsive to the needs of women in their community, and so money is spent differently. And why this study is interesting is because the paper cited a number of other research which said that investments by a panchayat are usually based on this process of increased discussion among the panchayat members, and there's a formal process of voting on whether or not money is spent on a particular project. So it's supposed to be more, systematic and democratic. But here is the evidence from one paper saying that female panchayats tend to pay more attention to the needs of women in their, because as women, presumably they have the same complaints. And so they tend to spend more on the needs brought up by women, right? So this...
When this research was conducted in Rajasthan?
I'm not sure, and I think in this case I forgot, but it was recent, last 3-4 years.
4 years?
Yeah.
And what was the district visited by the researcher?
I don't remember that, but I can share the paper.
Jaisalmer, Barmer?
I wouldn't remember. I have to read a lot of studies.
Because I also first had information regarding this Panch Pati.
Oh, I see.
Right.
So I can share the study. I'm sorry I didn't put that down here, but I can share that with Professor Vajpayee. I think it's pretty interesting. I know the first author was Duflo, Esther Duflo, who's a very famous economist. And so the first author was Duflo, but I think it's Rukmini Chattopadhyay or something. So I can send you the study reference, you may want to take a look at that, right? Okay, so that was a natural experiment, an example of a natural experiment. The New Jersey law, minimum wage law, was another natural experiment because again it was a law passing that was beyond the control of the researcher. The only final thing that I would sort of like to say is it's important to use mixed methods because quantitative data can tell you some things. It cannot tell you everything. Quantitative data and large samples can tell you what is happening as a trend across a large group of respondents. But the why it's happening or the how it's happening comes from qualitative data when you can actually talk to people and understand, okay, why is this happening? Why are women punches spending more in response to the needs of women? Is it because they are more sensitive to the needs of women, or is there some other reason behind it? We don't know. And so that's why we recommend mixed methods. I know that legal research tends to be qualitative, and that's a good thing, I think, because you're getting into the in-depth of why something is happening. But combined with the quantitative method, the study becomes stronger, and so I would, encourage you, even in our work, we use, or in fact even mandate, mixed methods. We don't just use one design, statistical design, and leave it at that. We also try to encourage, where possible, and budgets permitting and all of that, right? This is an overall slide of all the different methods, their advantages and disadvantages. Yeah, sure.
This doubt is regarding qualitative method and quantitative method for the purpose of empirical research.
Right.
And for the purpose of doctoral research.
Right.
So what are basic fundamental differences between the qualitative approach and quantitative approach for empirical as well as doctoral research?
Quantitative data tends to look at larger samples. Qualitative data tends to look at smaller. Because you can't qualitatively interview 5,000 people. It would take you a very long time. So quantitative data is useful in analyzing. So for instance, there's a NREGA program which is implemented across the country. If I want to give the government feedback on NREGA as a whole, at a national level, it would be wrong for me to go to the state of Rajasthan, talk to 5 women in Rajasthan, in one district of Rajasthan, and then go and tell the government, this program is screwed up and it doesn't work because 5 women in Rajasthan said this. Do you think the government is going to take me seriously? Very unlikely they would. Because I'm basing my response on my 5-hour interviews with 5 women. Maybe I spent 5 or 10 or 15 days with them, and this was their feedback. But that is not enough to decide the basis of a whole national level policy. So if I want the government to take me seriously, what I need to do is do a survey maybe, take a larger sample size, look at data across the country to be able to say all the states or most of the states were represented in my sample. I interviewed 5,000 households or whatever the appropriate sample size is, and here is what people are saying about NREGA. So these are the trends across 5,000 people, and then in addition to that, I talked to 100 people, maybe 2 from every state or whatever the breakup is, and here is why there is a problem. So we know NREGA is working, but people are saying they're not getting paid on time. When in qualitative research or using focus group discussions or interviews, I also found that people are not being paid on time. So even though the scheme is great and people find employment useful and the money useful, what is also happening is that they're saying they're getting paid after 3 months or 6 months or 8 months. So they're spending all the time doing the labor, but they're not getting paid for it. And so this needs to improve. So qualitative and quantitative data usually used in combination provide much stronger results, but they have very different purposes. If you want larger samples, you generally have to use quantitative data. If you want nationally representative samples, they usually have to be quantitative. But always try and see if you can supplement by using, qualitative data. So both, I would see them as twin pillars of good empirical research. There are, of course, I should point out, I don't think too many people will argue that mixed methods is a good way to go, but there are researchers who feel for policy making, quantitative way is the only way to go because you can look at much bigger numbers and analyze statistically and objectively. There are people who feel, I know there's a group of economists who feel very, very strongly about using statistical approaches. But I think the awareness about qualitative data, it can tell you, quantitative data can tell you what is happening. Qualitative data tells you how and why it's happening. And so they're all important questions when you're thinking about laws and when you're thinking about policy.
The question is interface between these approaches and empirical research, number one. Number two, these approaches and doctoral research.
I don't understand. So in terms of interface between the two approaches?
And empirical research, the relevance.
I guess it would depend on the kind of research that you're doing, but in my work I haven't actually found a difference. I could use both. And in terms of doctoral research, I've used quantitative methods for doctoral research. I didn't have budgets to do qualitative research, but I could have, if I had grant money or something, I could have, my research was on NREGA, so I could have interviewed qualitative also. So at least, I don't know about legal research, but in the course of my work, we don't really have a difference.
So qualitative approach is possible only in case of empirical research, not possible in case of doctoral research.
No, you can do both. I know people whose whole doctoral research is only qualitative, not quantitative at all. It just depends on the research question. So somebody was sharing in the break that they are looking at a group of 50 children who have been trafficked. Now, with that group, you may not want to do a quantitative research, because what's the point of surveying 50 children? That research question, when you're trying to figure out what was the exploitative nature of that, or experience of that child, or whatever, that's ideal. That's your research question, it's ideal for qualitative research. So if I was doing a doctoral, if I was doing my PhD on that, then that would be what I would, it would be purely qualitative. Because with 50 children, there's no point in having a quantitative study. You wouldn't even have the sample size required to, be able to estimate or make any inferences. So the method always depends on your research question. Don't let your research method determine your research question. You start with your question and move to the method. You do not start with the method and move to your question, right? So don't do it upside down. There are researchers, unfortunately, who say, oh, RCT is the gold standard. Okay, so I'm going to use RCT. Now, what is the question I can measure with an RCT? That's the wrong approach. Pick your question first and then figure out which design works best for you, right? Okay, any other questions or concerns? No? I think everyone's tired by this point and enough of quantitative methods. Tomorrow in your SPSS training, you will probably learn how to use the software. SPSS is exciting because it's simple. There are also more, for those of you who are adventurous, there is also Stata, and then there's R, and there's any number of software you can use. All softwares have their advantages and disadvantages. But SPSS is very user-friendly. If you use MS Office and MS Word, you know the drop-down menus that you have. The big joy of SPSS is that you don't have to learn how to code or to write computer code. You can just pick the drop-down options. But I think it's important to remember, you probably will only be able to do some initial stuff because you have a limited amount of time on your agenda. But I would suggest get copies of the software if it's accessible to you and play around with it. Use small data sets which you can just make up yourself, or there are freely available data sets. Don't pick a large one, pick maybe 10, a sample of 10 if you're worried about, oh, this, I don't know how to do this. And just run your own analysis in SPSS. Just do cross tabulations of how many men and women in the sample, how many people aged 50 and above and 50 and below. That's how you get started learning how to clean data, how to look at data, how to run graphs, and it's very simple in SPSS. So it's a great, SPSS is a great way for those, and for most of you that'll be enough. You won't need anything more than that. For those of you who are more adventurous and want to get into more statistical stuff, then there's Stata, which is beyond SPSS, but a little less than R. R is another software which is open source, so it's freely available on the net, you don't have to pay for it. But it involves a little more learning how to code. So it may not be for everyone, right? I think for your purposes, from what Professor Vajpayee has described, SPSS is enough. So the thing with software is, if you don't, I'll tell you this from my own experience, somebody can teach it to you, but till you start using it yourself, you're not going to learn how to use it. So just play around with it, enter some of your own details or data in, and then try and see what graphs you can run. Do silly stuff like kids do when they learn how to use a computer. You've probably seen how that happens. They just try all sorts of things and then they figure out. Then they get better than us because they've played around with everything. They haven't lost their sense of adventure like we have, right? So nobody's judging you in the space of your office or your room. Just do all the analysis. Look at the stuff tomorrow. I will tell you, I started using quant data or designs only about 3 years ago. And I'm still fascinated at how the trends you can, before that I did a lot of qualitative work. But the trends you can produce from quantitative data are incredible, and nobody can argue with them because it's based on many, many observations, right? Okay, I'll stop here. I'm sure everyone's hungry. If I'm going to be around, so if you have questions you want to ask me privately, sure, please come and ask. Thank you for your patience. You've been a great group. I'm sure some of this was scary for some of you who hate stats, but we haven't gotten into any statistical stuff. We've only talked about the methods. But to do the methods, you need to learn some of this. In fact, in SPSS, it's dropped down. You can do regression, discontinuity design, etc. How to compute a mean. It's already built into the commands there. So it's very simple to run, right? So I'd encourage you to do that. And then, as I mentioned, you have all the techniques with you. Just Google if you're thinking of trying to use one and test it out, right? Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. Thank you for being a great audience. Appreciate your help.